Obviously is a biopic, but it functions in a lot of other ways. You know, it's an origin story. You see how she became the legal force that we know her to be. It's a love story. It's a mother-daughter story. It's sort of a feminist how-to. And I wonder if there was any of those narratives that struck each of you particularly when you were looking at the script.
Yeah, I think so much of telling the story was about how does someone become the notorious RBG, because she's pretty phenomenal. And definitely, it's obviously we know her so well from 1993 when she's been really in the public eye, and a lot of it was charting who was this person when they were younger. You know, what were the decisions they made, what were the societal forces on them, and what made them become the person that she is today. So that was a huge part of it, kind of working out who is the person behind the icon. And then obviously so much of it is about the family, and it's about what this extraordinary family achieved together, and how they managed to effect such huge, incredible change in a time when it felt like the world was completely against them.
Anybody else?
Well, I think it's all those things. I think it's definitely a film about how change happens, and you know, I felt when I read the script, I immediately felt I had to tell the story, because I felt like I had lived it in obviously in a different field and a different industry and different generation, but having a long-standing marriage, which was a real metaphor for the film, equal partnership. And I had that, I have it, and Ruth had it. And we were both mothers, and both Jewish, and both had broken the glass ceiling in our own ways, paved the path for generations to come. So I really understood that young woman who had many doors closed, and the constant pushing to open the doors, but you know, not in an angry way, in a real way. And their marriage was really a great part of their story. Love prevails. And I don't know this for sure, but I often wonder what Ruth Bader Ginsburg would be without Martin Ginsburg. And, you know, what would he be without her? You know, he was a very, you know, progressive male in the 50s. And when I met Armie, you know, and to this day, and when I met, you know, there's not as many progressive males as there perhaps should be. But when I met Armie, you know, he is a father of 2 young children. He has an equal partnership with his wife. I don't mean to speak for you.
No, trust me, she's the dominant one. Yeah.
And so I knew he was the guy because he was living it. And I knew that Felicity had the depth and the deep heart to embody RBG and go there in a, you know, from her heart and from her soul. And then the two of them together, just sort of, you never know if it's really going to work. But it worked, and we were very lucky it did.
Well, one thing that you also had that was important was sign-off from the justice a little bit on casting. I know, Mimi, you told me when we spoke before that she was actually quite, you know, interested in who was going to play Marty.
Oh, yeah.
And certainly Felicity, she wanted you to play the part. So how important was it for you guys to have that seal of approval?
Oh, well, for me it was extremely important. She didn't have casting approval, but of course we gave it to her. And she was quite taken with Armie, yes. She couldn't take her eyes off of him. She's a little boy crazy. And it was...
She is human.
Yeah, she is human, and you know, that was, you know, one of the things we were going for, obviously, is to make them human. And I have kind of a funny story about the sex scene, which you know, is it a sex scene? I had cut this, you know, we shot the scene and we went further with it, and I cut a version of it that was kind of hot and, you know, really cool and very contemporary. And then I kept looking at it over and over again. I kept going, yeah, I like it, but, you know, will the justice like it? Will she be able to watch it? You know, will she, what will happen? Anyway, I sat there, you know, for months, like back, forth, back. So then I took the hot version away and just made it very tame. And we went, after we saw the film, we went to dinner with her biographer, and her biographer said, oh my God, the sex scene. And I, you know, I was kind of startled. And I said, well, you should have seen it before. And then the biographer said to RBG, what did you think, Ruth? And RBG said, I'm fine with it. So it was very funny. And then, just one more quick thing. We screened it with her in Washington the other night, and Nina Totenberg asked her the same question, but she answered it differently. She thought about it for a long, she takes a long time to think about something and process it, and she said Marty would have loved it. She's a human.
Yeah.
Well, another big part of the story is that it is a very intimate story, a familial story, in the sense that it was written by, the screenplay was written by her nephew. And he actually, you know, of course, knew her growing up. He had funny stories. He told me that when he was growing up, every year from like 8 to 14 for Hanukkah, she gave him a copy of the US Constitution. And at first he was like, what? And then as a teenager he thought, no, this was inspiring to me, you know? And then later, only later in his 30s did he realize, you know, she probably gets a discount at the Supreme Court store. She's a very busy lady. But so those kind of things kind of filtered in. He got access to her notes at the Library of Congress. He read, you know, the sarcastic comments she wrote in the marginalia of the briefs when she was a student. And all that stuff filtered in. So you guys had not just, you know, her imprimatur, her seal of approval, but this sense of like the family is behind this. How did that inform your work, or did it?
I think the movie would have been very different if her family member hadn't have written the script. I think if anybody else would have tried to write the story of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it would have focused more on courtroom drama or some sort of Hollywoodization of sort of the ups and downs of her life and all that. But what you get to see here is really an inside glimpse into the justice. You get to see what her family life was like. You get to see what was going on behind closed doors. And I think that if anyone else would have written it, you wouldn't believe it. But when you see that it's actually her nephew that wrote this, you go, maybe their relationship was that equal and progressive at the time. Maybe their home life really did foster the success that they both had. And what I think it does is that it fleshes out sort of this mythology of RBG that we have, where she is this sort of unapproachable superhero, you know, titan of law and all that. And now you see that it's really a woman behind it who is driven and motivated and recognized a wrong in the world and an injustice that she wanted to right. And I think that's really aspirational for someone to watch it and go, well, I have problems with the world. I want to make a change. And this is proof that if you just dedicate yourself to that cause and you are unrelentingly determined to it, that you can do that too. As long as you're as smart as RBG.
What was it like when you guys were first meeting her, when you went to her chambers? Recount that experience a little bit.
It was, wow, you know, it's intimidating at first. It's nerve-wracking playing someone who is, I think, one of the most beloved figures that we have at the moment, and someone who's as deeply principled as she is. So I think we were all quite shy, weren't we, going in? You're sort of a little bit cautious and nervous. But when we went in, she was just very charming and couldn't take her eyes off Armie Hammer. And very, because obviously we'd had her blessing so early on, so we knew that going into it. So it's about sort of getting to know someone and getting to know their psychology and just getting to know each other on a sort of personal, more casual level. Because obviously there's so much that we can watch in terms of footage and listening to her in court, and which enables you to sort of get an understanding. But there's nothing quite like meeting the real deal.
And you did listen, there is a lot of audio of her when she is trying cases before the Supreme Court, which I know you listened to. What did you hear in that audio?
Yeah, it was, well, I think people's voices reveal, you know, they reveal so much about who they are and how they approach things, and so much of Justice Ginsburg's power has been in her ability to shift opinion, to change the status quo through her writing, actually, through her incredible ability to write these very persuasive and very human cases. And that's what I noticed listening back to them, is they appealed on a very, very common sense level, so that it made it seem totally normal and totally natural that inequality was absolute nonsense.
And there was also something about the Brooklyn accent, right, that you picked up on?
Yeah, her divine Brooklyn accent, which I come from a place in England called Birmingham, which has, it's almost like, it kind of has many parallels to Brooklyn. It has a very, very strong regional accent, and in some respects in England, it's sort of, it has a, I don't know the best way to explain it, it has a reputation, it's kind of like laughed at a little bit because it has such a strong accent. So I really identified with that in her, that feeling of not being kind of from the most sort of, you know, not being from London or Manhattan, or not, you know, not being right in the center of things, of having that little bit of distance and that little bit of perspective. So I definitely kind of harnessed that in some way. But yeah, you really hear it in the tapes and the audio recordings of listening to her. You hear when she gets really frustrated and really annoyed, then her Brooklyn accent really like hammers through. It's so awesome.
Armie, you know, the real Martin Ginsburg was like a very accomplished chef, and the justice gave you a copy of a cookbook that the Supreme Court made in his honor when he passed away, and I know you cooked some meals from it. How did that fare?
Well, I'd like to think it went really well. No, the first time I met the justice, she said, "Here, I want you to have this," and it was the cookbook for Martin Ginsburg that she sort of inscribed to me, and it's now sitting on my shelf, you know. But while I was there in Montreal, I thought, you know, a huge part of Marty's personality was his love for entertaining and sort of hosting. And I thought, well, okay, that's a really good way for me to try to get my way into this and really understand it. So I spent a couple of days working on several recipes from the cookbook. I made, I mean, probably like 7 or 8 different recipes, like from appetizers to entrees, you know, that kind of thing.
The pate.
The pate, yeah.
In the movie.
Yeah, I did try to make the pate,
which
he puts Calvados in, which I thought was really interesting and really yummy for anybody out there who likes to cook. Put Calvados in your pate.
Recipe tips. Do you guys know you'd be getting those tonight?
There you go. But I did. I had a dinner that I called the Party Marty meal, and I invited, it was Felicity and Mimi and some of the producers and some other of the cast, and everybody came to my apartment in Montreal, and we sat and we just ate a meal that Martin would have prepared, and we drank a bunch of wine and we had a great time, and by the end of the evening everyone was like dancing in my apartment. It was like an 8-person dance party, which was really kind of funny. But yeah, it really was kind of like my clue into sort of who this guy was, because he was the guy that if he was going to cook for a dinner party, you wanted to go, and then you would hope that you'd be lucky enough to sit next to him at the dinner party.
Yeah, he was a charmer. I mean, one of the things that I learned in doing some reporting about this movie, first story that's yet to come out, but you guys are getting a sneak preview of it when we're talking here tonight, is that there was resistance on the part of financiers and producers to picking up the movie initially because they said the character of Martin Ginsburg is not believable. The supportive husband, where does that come from? And
6,000 years of patriarchy.
And I know, Mimi, you were sometimes part of those conversations. How did you counter, you know, those arguments?
Yes, there are good men. Yeah. I'm married to one. You know, there are good, decent, beautiful men who are equal partners. And yeah, I kept fighting that because, you know, you don't want to really add conflict when there isn't. Their conflict was how they argued with each other about the law. It wasn't at each other. And
even that was just iron sharpening iron.
That's right.
You know, yeah.
Yeah.
So was it important to all of you to kind of bring that partnership to light on the screen, as well as, you know, tell the story of her legal battle?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely key. I mean, I think that's what's so important about the story. It's how, I mean, ultimately how men and women rise together, you know, and that's what you see so clearly in their dynamic, is that they push each other along. They harness each other's strengths. I mean, that's what I think makes it so unusual. We don't see those kind of stories told in film. You know, it's usually one has to triumph over the other, and you know. But in this case, it was very much they were partners. They weren't kind of coming at it from ego or competition or, you know, all those things. It was how do we do this? How do we solve this problem? And how do we do it together?
There's also this element of like a sports movie in it, right? With the in the last section where you're in the courtroom. I mean, that's like the climactic battle, and you just not, you know, it's like a boxing match, but you're not fighting. You're using words. It is a part that deviates a little bit from reality in that Ruth Bader Ginsburg did not flub any of her, you know, actual stuff in the courtroom. Yeah. But I wonder if you could talk.
There's actually a really great quote. I don't mean to interrupt, but there's a great quote from, was it Judge Doyle or was it Bozarth? I don't remember. Daniel was telling us, the writer of the film, was talking to either Bozarth, who was the attorney representing the government, or no, it was Bozarth. It was Bozarth, who's played by Jack Rayner expertly in the film.
Yeah,
and that Bozarth said going up against Ruth and Marty in an argument like this in a court was like trying to fight the fires of hell with a bucket of water. He was like, we didn't stand a chance. So there was slight dramatic licensing taken with how Ruth flubbed, because she never ever did. Yeah.
Yeah, I think such a huge part of it was how she harnessed all that, you know, all that frustration and that anger that she felt, you know, constantly being in a position where she was discriminated against. And it's fascinating to see someone tracking that course where they use that, and she takes that anger and she puts it into something that can affect great change. I think that's what's so remarkable. She managed to take that sense of injustice and was able to then fight for other people because she had empathy for their injustice, and then ultimately, you know, completely change the system.
Yeah, I think from everybody that I've talked to who's been in her orbit a little bit, they felt somehow changed by learning her story, by being around her, and I wonder if you guys could talk to that at all.
Well, I would say that she takes a long time. She thinks before she speaks, and I'm trying to still at this age do that, and so that was a really good lesson. But I think she became a champion for, you know, equal rights, because she knew the law better than anybody else. And we're very lucky that she did. You know, she really showed us how, and really changed so much for all of us in America and beyond.
Any women in this audience who have a credit card in your own name, or have rented a car or opened a bank account that is because of Justice Ginsburg's contribution? That was illegal when she started practicing law.
That's right, and I think a lot of people who sort of know her as, you know, either just a justice or as a pop culture phenomenon, the notorious RBG, don't really know the full history of what she accomplished. And when you see even, you know, a small portion of it, like in this film, it's astounding. It's astounding to think about all the challenges that she faced, all the doors that she, you know, knocked open with her small frame. Yeah. Were you sort of astounded as you were learning about this as well?
Yeah, you can't help but respect and admire it without a doubt. I mean, just the hard work as well, and the absolute determination. Hello, that alone. I mean, the consistency. It's interesting do you remember when we went to her apartment and her desk is literally about that far from her bed, so that if she wakes up in the middle of the night and she feels inspired, she jumps up and goes and writes something down. And you see that in every level of the way she functions, just that absolute focus and the ability to put the time in, to kind of not let the setbacks kind of knock you down and make you give up.
Yeah, after she, you know, had her rib injury where she broke the ribs, I think she was back in the office within like a day and continued her really otherwise breakneck, maybe bad choice of words, her incredibly difficult speaking engagements. She's still going to the opera. Her level of endurance is, I know she is not a superhero, but her level of endurance sometimes strikes me as superheroic.
Yeah, she used to have, when she's had cancer, and when she'd have her chemo on Friday evening, so that then she could recover over the weekend to then be back at work on a Monday, and didn't take a single day off throughout that
She had cancer twice.
Yeah.
We have some questions from our friends on Facebook Live. Virginia from Facebook is asking, did the justice talk about the harassment she faced when you guys interacted?
That's a good question.
I actually did not speak to her about any personal harassment. It was sort of, everything I had read, was the harassment. And so, but I never talked to her about it personally. I talked to her about how did she know Marty was the one, and she was dating this guy, and they played charades, and she said he was a real idiot. And, then she said, when I met Marty, he was so smart and brilliant and charming. How could I not marry him? And out of that dinner came the charade scene, which wasn't in the film. Yeah. It was great getting to know her and getting her to trust us,
You spent some time going to her apartment. You mentioned Felicity, and Kathy from Facebook asks, how much time did you spend with her?
Yeah, we had a trip where we were about to start shooting, and we went out to Washington, and it was a bit like sort of it was like we were all sort of students again. It was kind of going into the Supreme Court and spending time with her in her office, and then in her apartment, and we went with Nelson Coates, the phenomenal production designer, who was sort of running around just looking at everything, because obviously all those locations were reproduced exactly as they were.
Yeah, the apartment they lived in New York
was extraordinary. And then we all went out for dinner and drank wine and had fun in the evening.
Armie, Jim from Facebook would like to know that he says, you seem like an intersectional feminist. How did you get to this point as a straight white male? Thank you, Jim from Facebook.
Thanks for the question, Jim. I've always been really lucky. My whole life, I've always been surrounded by really strong, powerful, self-assured, independent women. So it just never really occurred to me to be anything but. If being an intersectional feminist means that you are for gender equality, then Jim's right. That's 100% what I feel like I am. It boggles my mind to watch scenes in the movie where the dean says things like, why are you occupying the space that should go to a man? I just never lived in a world, or, I might live in a world where that happens, but I never lived in a home where that happens, and I never ran in social groups where that was permitted or allowed. So I guess I can't take too much credit. It really just kind of came naturally from the people that I was always surrounded by, and I feel really fortunate for that.
Well, I think one of the lessons of this movie is that, the relationships that we see at home matter, and you take those with you out into the world.
That's why therapy is such a lucrative profession.
Obviously, this film I know was in the works long before the documentary, the recent documentary that came out this year. But Brianna from Facebook would like to know, how does the film compare to the doc, and did you reference it at all?
They asked us to be in the doc, but we were just starting to film, and they had just finished. And I had locked picture and finished the film before the doc came out. So I never saw the doc until after we were finished. And I was absolutely amazed that their film started with "Take their feet off our neck," and our film ended with those words. And that really blew my mind. they were, they are sister projects in that they complement each other. And so I thought it was perfect that that happened. Yeah.
And the doc has certainly been, a tremendous success, and I think probably, introduced a lot of people to some of the other accomplishments that she had, that they maybe, this case doesn't figure too prominently in the documentary.
It's not even in the movie.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even in the doc.
Right, right.
Which we were very relieved.
Okay, we have our last Facebook question. Ibrahim asks, do you think we have made progress regarding a woman's place in society? Facebook has given us all the easy questions.
Good question.
Well, I would say, women have come a long way in society, and there's a long way to go. I would say only between 2008 and 2018, of all the films made during that time, only 7% were made by women. So that's an ungodly, horrific figure. So has it changed? Inch by inch. And, the takeaway from this film is we all have a voice, and we all have a voice we can use to make change, however small, however large.
Just to go back to your point,
Yeah.
you just said, I've been making movies for 14, 15 years now, and you are the first woman director that I've worked with on a feature film, which is crazy, especially considering that there are more women on Earth than men.
Yeah.
It's bizarre.
Which, we always strive for on our sets. We had gender parity in all our department heads, equal men, equal women. And and you can do it. You just have to, really bring people up.
And by the way, anybody worried about gender parity on a set, let me relieve you and sort of like assuage your doubts and say it didn't feel any different. It wasn't like when we went to a set that finally was able to achieve gender parity that we were like, oh yeah, a lot of women. No, it just felt like making a movie. Like, it didn't feel any different.
It felt better. And
by the way, 100%. 100%. Was like, it felt better. It felt better. So anyone who has an issue with that, shut up.
Felicity, you told me when we talked before that you sometimes now think of the justice when you're in a tough situation. You think, how would she handle it?
Yeah, without a doubt. I come back to her all the time and just think, just that ability to keep pushing forward and keep, as Mimi said, change is possible, and you don't have to live with the status quo. And when we come together and we unite, we can push for change and make things a little better. And definitely we have further to go. But particularly with, in the last year with the Me Too movement, and I think there's a greater transparency, particularly in the industry. But it's up to everyone to make active decisions. I think particularly when you're in a position when you have any say in terms of employment, to make sure that that becomes part of the decision-making process, that it is a conscious thing to have gender parity, because it makes for a much better environment, a much more evolved, more highly functioning working environment. And as we said, I mean, it just feels like absolute common sense and should be the norm and not the exception.
And also, as a study that we reported on this week said, women-oriented films make more money at the box office.
I read that. Yeah,
so,
yeah.
And businesses that have more women in them also make more money. But before we go too far down that road,
Let's go. Let's take that all the way.
I did want to end on talking about the amazing moment at the end of the film, the cameo by the Justice, because one of the things that you guys, I think, are talking about that she brings out, I think, in a lot of people is a sense of hope. When you think about all that she faced in her life and where she is now and what she is continuing to achieve, it's almost impossible not to be filled with this sense of possibility. And I feel like seeing her at the end of that film and the expression that she had on her face was, kind of imbued a little bit of that. Yeah. So Mimi, tell me about how that cameo came to be, and you guys tell me what it was like to have her in your world a little bit versus being in hers.
Yeah, well, I was, I had not shot the film yet, but I knew how I was going to film the opening sequence. And I wanted Felicity, I wanted the young RBG to, be walking in this sea of men with, these brown and gray and black suits, and not in too obvious a color, a blue color, because her favorite color was blue. And E.C. Musendin found this beautiful cornflower blue material and made that gorgeous dress that swayed in the wind as she was entering into her future. And so we were scouting DC because we shot there as well, as obviously, and I was standing in front of the steps of the Supreme Court with our incredible director of photography, Michael Grady, and I said to him, I want to, well, first I'll tell you, there was a different ending to the film. The ending was Marty and Ruth were sitting in the back of the Supreme Court listening to Alan Deere try his case with her words. And Marty said to Ruth in the scene, "Those are your words." And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. It was like they were sitting in the back of the bus. We had just come off this triumphant win that overturned a century of gender discrimination. And I just wanted to mirror the end of the movie, the beginning of the movie with the end. So I was standing there saying to him, I want to change the ending. I want to have RBG, our young RBG, walking up the steps alone and walking and ascending to her future, to who she has become. And I want young RBG to morph into the real RBG. And he was looking at me. We're going, yeah, that sounds great. And I pitched it to the producers, and one of them was a little leery, what if it doesn't work? What are we going to tell her, And I said, it's going to work. So I wrote her a letter, and she said yes. And it was remarkable. But then it was like, what is she going to wear? And EC designed a beautiful, I wanted to go into the darker blues on Felicity, because she had come so far, and her work was so deep like the ocean. I know that sounds corny, but that was the feeling, and she designed that beautiful dress for Felicity. And then we had to figure out, what is Justice Ginsburg going to wear? Well, we got a rack of all these coats and dresses, and there was this one Max Mara coat and dress that I was obsessed with, and I wanted her to wear it. But you can't go in and say, here's your dress. So we came in with a rack of clothes, and we just said, here's some outfits we'd like you to look at, and why don't you just go through them and pick one? And she went straight to the Max Mara and said, this one. And she tried it on, and that was it. It was fate. And it was amazing and astounding, and it was nerve-wracking to direct the Justice. Because she is a diva after all. No, it was beautiful. I had her do the take 3 times. After the second take, I said, can you do one more, please, Justice Ginsburg? She said, one more. And she was remarkable and a real pro.
Yeah.
Do you guys have anything else you want to add to that story?
Yeah, it was amazing to watch her, wasn't it?
It was amazing.
It was, again, it was just really emotional, just seeing her, go up those steps. I think we were, all the crew and all the cast, we were all just like,
everybody was crying.
watching her go up. It was, because we shot it right at the end of the...
It's the last shot of the film.
Yeah, of the film. So we'd all collectively been through this experience. Everyone was so into it. And we'd been shooting in Montreal, so we just went with it was a bit of a smaller crew, wasn't it, that we went out to Washington with, and we were just all, we'd been through it, we'd all been doing those scenes for weeks and weeks and weeks, seeing all the struggles and the disappointments and the triumphs, and then to see her just course that way up those steps, it was majestic.
I didn't get invited. It's true, I wasn't there.
Well, now you get to watch it on screen like the rest of us. That's all we have time for. Thank you guys so much for joining us. You've been a terrific audience. Thank you all.